Today, we will look at the sort of benefits and the drawbacks experienced in German and Japanese workplaces. We will both look at the legal responses to the crisis. Work, of course, is a highly regulated area, and therefore you cannot just do things differently. There have to be adjustmts in the legal framework, maybe more so in Germany than in Japan. We will see, we will find out. But then also, of course, work organization, the way people interact now online, teleworking, home office, mobile working, a lot of different concepts. To what extent has this been implemented, and how does it affect the motivation, the satisfaction, the productivity of work in Japan or Germany? Of course, especially working at home, telework from home, if you have a family, if you have kids around, how does this affect, how does teleworking affect sort of the work-life balance? How does it affect your family life at home? These are also questions related to our topic today. And besides the legal framework, there are also lots of questions related to policy, economic policy. To what extent does it support the adjustments that companies and employees are undertaking today? Another question, of course, is this going to be only temporary? Are we doing this just to cope with the COVID pandemic? Or is the COVID pandemic a kind of accelerator? Does it accelerate the digital transformation in the workplace? Will work organization look differently even when we come out of the COVID? Will things stay with us? For the DIJ, I can say that the experience and the good experiences with online events will certainly stay with us. We will try to use these benefits also in the future, maybe in combination with on-site events. But for tonight, we will look at the more general question, of course, how COVID-19 affected work and employment and families in Germany and Japan. And we have four, highly qualified speakers to talk about this subject. We have two speakers from Germany and two speakers from Japan. And they also split up two who look at the business situation, adjustments on the side of businesses and employees, and the others who look more at the legal side, the reforms and adjustments in the legal framework related to work and employment. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. I will not explain much about the background. You find some short CV of every presenter here on our program, on our flyer, and you might have a look at it. So I welcome first now Michael Johannes Pils, who is a lawyer and partner at Taylor Wessing in Düsseldorf, and he will tell us about the situation of work under COVID in Germany from a legal perspective. Please, Michael.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. And I'm very pleased to give you a short introduction on how we work with Corona, under Corona. And I have prepared some slides for you, focusing on three major issues. First will be health and safety. Second will be some kinds of regulatory frameworks to do from the company sides. And the third will be the ongoing legal court proceedings we will see in Germany. So which is giving you a certain experience how Germany will deal with Corona from a labor law, employment law perspective. Corona has definitely a huge impact on all kinds of businesses and all kinds of industry sectors. And as you can see in the first introduction, we see that already all kinds of areas of employment law are in a certain way affected by Corona. and needs to adjustments. Be it the way of working at home, working mobile, working in the office, be it the way how we deal with quarantine, with the lockdown of schools, of kindergartens. So this has a huge impact. But according to the latest surveys, we will see that Corona will give us a certain focus on health and safety. And this is what we can see on the next slide, business continuity, the big questions, how we ensure that the business can be continued under Corona. And if we just briefly see the steps, I tried to make a certain step plan, like a kind of overview in this way. So you can see at the very beginning, there had been a completely lockdown, and then we tried to reopen the business. And of course, reopening the business leads to implementation of new law, in particular the so-called Arbeitsschutzstandards, the health, safety, occupational standards regarding COVID-19. And we tried to continue with this very general standard during the summer time, and we need to adjust this standard in August in a very detailed way, giving detailed regulations to how to organize business, how to organize the working environment in detail. And now we are asking what will be the next normal. Will it be just the continuation of this regulation? Will it be a more flexible way of working at home? So this is something we see in our daily discussions. So let's briefly look on health and safety, because I think this is something you should take away, that this is a very, very important element of the Corona pandemic in Germany. So in April, we had some general standards, as mentioned before, and according to the labor minister, Hubert Heil, this is a German-wide clear and mandatory standard, so all the companies can implement those standards, and then they can continue the business as usual under those standards. You can find the standards in the link and the presentation, and you can also see them in English. So they are in a certain way accessible for all people in the world. This is not a law. This is interesting. This is just more a general regulation, but those regulations are factual binding, because if you don't implement them, there's the idea that your business is not in line with health and safety law, and this can lead, of course, to serious consequences, criminal offenses, a stop of business, and of course a big reputational risk within the society. And you may have experienced in certain industry sectors that there's a certain focus on health and safety. For instance, hospitals, nurseries, the meat industry in Germany, but we can see this all over the complete industry sector. Even the lawyers have been affected by health and safety issues in this respect. In July, the government was focusing on the vulnerable employees. So how to define people who need to be protected by the law in a specific way, and how to assess which group of person is particularly vulnerable. In August, we see the next step of health and safety regulation in Germany, and this is the so-called occupational health and safety rules. Those rules are much more detailed in comparison to the health and safety standard. Much more details. This, of course, leads to a better way of enforcement, a better way for employees to focus on the standards, for employers to implement them. So this is a certain way of regulation which is affecting all kinds of processes in the company. The most famous one are the 1.5 meters social distance, but this also contains separated working spaces, new cleaning policies, ventilation concepts, usage of rooms, social rooms, toilets, personal uses of working materials, and of course a kind of infection management, tracing of contacts, and very recently home office work, remote work at home. From a legal perspective, this is of course quite challenging, as we can see in the next case studies, because it forced the companies to implement clear instructions, clear factual instructions for their employees, how to behave under Corona and how to ensure that those very detailed regulations are followed. And I just summarize some typical contents of those instructions. And as always, you need not only to instruct the employees, but you have to train, and if necessary, you have to monitor the employees. There's one very important aspect in Germany that many companies have a so-called works council, which is a special type of employee representatives in Germany. Japanese companies are always not so familiar with this concept, but this works council is of course very important when it comes to the implementation of the Corona occupational health and standards rules. So this is, has to be consulted. We have to ask them, and we have to cooperate from an employer's perspective with the works council. This is at least very important to follow the rules in this respect. If we go further, then of course we have to train in a certain way the employees, and especially the managing employees, in order to comply with the mandatory legal obligations. This is not only raising awareness, but also enabling those people to follow the regulations. Same we can see from the home office arrangements. We have to ensure that there is a arrangement. So far there is no law. We will see whether we have a law in the next months, but this also requires quite complex regulations, and you can see most relevant aspects on the right part of the presentation. Last but not least example, which is very typical for Germany. So we see an increased number of court litigations regarding COVID-19. So I made a research. If you just look from February until now in our general databases like Juris, you find over 6,000 comments on Corona. So this is exploding in Germany. And within the last 3 months, I have detected over 900 court decisions. Of course, not only related to employment. There are not so many published resolutions and judgments, but nevertheless, there is an increased number. And we can see that the people, the Works Council is triggering a lot of court proceedings, like, do we have a right to work from home? Do we have to implement technical controls in order to ensure that the employees work with 1.5 meters distance? What is the right of the Works Council with regard to the co-determination? Is it just something the employer can implement, or is it something we have to discuss with the Works Council? How should we reopen our business? Can we do this without consultation? Can we implement short-time work by change notice, Änderungskündigung? So there's a lot of questions in this respect. And from a digitalization perspective, last but not least, the video conferences for Works Council. Is the Works Council obliged to use video conferences tools, or can they just use normal tools? So this is our typical questions, and you can see this is very detailed and very German-like, that we try to enforce our law by court proceedings. It is true, sum up, that the documentation, the regulatory framework is exploding, that this is of course causing some problems to the industry. So we have to reorganize the business in order to comply with those standards. But we see also some benefits, and this is something you should take with you, that the health and safety protection is a core element of business continuity, that the employees are asking for that the Works Council is asking for clear health protection management. It's part of the social responsibility. And of course, we will see whether this regulatory framework is continuing or whether we will have some more general standards. And the second comment in this respect is that, of course, digitalization is, let's say, the winner of the prizes. So we can work from home in certain parts of the industry. And this, of course, is also some benefits of the corona that we are forced to follow. So thank you very much. I'm a little bit over time, 3 minutes. So but this is my presentation.
Thank you very much. Very informative. And I move directly on to Andrea Hammermann. She's a senior economist in the field of labor market and personnel economics at the German Economic Institute. And she will inform us about how German businesses have been reacting within this new situation, under this new situation. Please, Andrea.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to give you an economic perspective on the corona impact on work organization in Germany. And I'd like to start with the impact on the German labor market. So there's a forecast by the Institute for Employment Research, who expected a decrease in GPD by 5.2% in this year. We see a large decrease in labor demand. If you see the third quarter of 2020 compared to the previous year, we have 31% less job vacations. So this is a very difficult time for young people entering the labor market in Germany. We also see a decline in labor supply. So labor force declined by over 500,000 people from February to June, which is mainly due to a decrease of marginal employment. We have less immigrants, and we also see a lot of older workers early retire, and it's not quite sure if they will come back after the crisis, because we have a huge gap between demand and labor supply already before the pandemic. So despite of the massive impact on economy, the impact on the unemployment rate is rather moderate, you can say. So from 5.0% in 2019 to 5.9% in 2020. So many companies try to keep their employees. And we see differences across sectors. We have a sharp decline in wholesale and retail trade, restaurants and accommodations, but we also, on the other side, see an increase in employment in the sectors, construction sector and communication and information. So it's a very differentiated picture. So I'd like to talk about the two main measures to stabilize employment. Michael already talked about short-time work, which is massively used in Germany. So in June 2020, around 16% of all employees were on short-time work, and on average around 58% fewer working hours. So, and this equals over 5 million people who worked short-time work. So on the other side, we have remote work. Between the beginning of July and mid-August 2020, we have more than 1/3 of all employees older than 16 years worked permanently or at least a few days per week from home. So the main objective for employers to implement or extend remote work is to support the overall strategy of social distancing and prevent the spread of COVID-19. And surely they want to keep the process running and thereby strengthen the organizational resilience to avoid bankruptcy. On the other hand, they try to maintain employers' workability and avoid as much as possible more short-time work and even layoffs. And especially for parents or people who have to care about other people, they offer flexibility to work from home so that they can have a better work-life balance and manage both areas. Let's take a look at remote work before the Corona pandemic. So German economic is rooted in manufacturing, and therefore we have a large share of workers who are not able to relocate their work. Nevertheless, there was identified a high potential to extend remote work, as we have seen in this year that this can happen. So remote workers are especially white-collar workers. They are high qualified and managers. And working at home is characterized in Germany by a few hours a week. So especially part-time workers usually work for 1 day a week at home, or a few hours in the evening. Especially managers do that, especially for overtime work. It is necessary, as Michael has already explained, that you differentiate between remote work or homework and telework, which is legally defined. And the employer is obliged to take care of risk assessment. Let's take a look at the Corona pandemic. We have a wider use of remote work. You can say that we have an increase from 1/5 to 1/3 of the employees working at least occasionally from home in Germany. We have a higher number of working hours, up to 100% during the lockdown in the springtime for a lot of employees. And we see that it's rather remote work than telework, so there was not a workplace set up by the employer for a lot of employees. So let's take a look at the employer's perspective and experience with remote work during the pandemic. Only 16% experienced problems implementing remote work, especially due to technical problems, technical infrastructure, and a grave communication. We see some mixed results concerning productivity. 35% experience that remote work turned out to be less productive. 27% reported even a higher productivity, but the majority of firms are convinced that cooperation is less efficient than the face-to-face interaction. So they have to come up with some new formats to foster social interaction. And we see they are very innovative, you can say. We have virtual coffee breaks, virtual Christmas parties, and so on. So some new formats have already been established. There's another aspect employees have to take care about, which is resentments within working groups who are not able to work from home. So we see some inequality within a working staff, which has to be addressed. Let's take a look at the employee's perspective. So overall, we see a high satisfaction with remote work. In March 2020, almost 1/3 of employees even are more satisfied with their homework arrangements than before the pandemic, and only 6% are less satisfied. So employees especially appreciate the saved commuting time. So in Germany, nearly 1/3 needs 1 hour and more per day to and from work. So there's a lot of working time which can be saved by remote work. But there are also some potential drawbacks we knew from a lot of studies. And for the first, difficult to send performance signals. So employees fear that they are less visible to their supervisors, and this could be detrimental for their promotion prospects. On the other hand, there are some people who like a clear separation between family and work areas, because both can be in conflict, time conflict, and you need clear arrangements of accessibility when you have to answer your phone and be accessible for work, and when you are not accessible. So this has to be clearly defined. So the interesting question is, what will remain, which I cannot answer, but there are also some studies I can quote. So 42% of all employers already said that they want to expanding remote work after the corona pandemic. 44% are still undecided, which might be a good idea just to see what the experience will be in the next months. So my personal guess is that a likely scenario for Germany would be a hybrid working routine with alternating working from home and in the office. But I think that we see that a larger fraction of employees will work remotely, and that we see a rise in the hours spent at home. As Michael already explained, a law is expected. So the Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs has already submitted a draft implementing the right of 24 days of remote work, which has already been modified due to some opposition within the government, but we expect that, that there will be a law in the next months. So therefore, I like to thank you and want to give back to Franz.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And we move on now to Japan, from Germany to Japan, and we start again with a legal assessment. And I just, in the chat, I just encouraged you to come up with questions we can then pick up during the discussion round. You still have some time, but feel free to post your questions already now. So we move to Japan, and we here have Chisako Takaya. She's a lawyer and partner at Mori, Hamada, and Matsumoto. And she will tell us about changes in the legal framework under COVID-19 in Japan. Chisako, please.
Thank you very much for introduction, and I would like to introduce the first happened in Japan under the COVID-19 situations. So like Germany, COVID-19 affects a lot in the labor environment in Japan. And Japan government announced the emergency declaration in March and request the company to create a safety working environments. And to respond to the government request, many of the Japanese companies introduced the so-called teleworking or work at home situations. As you can see from this chart, before the declaration of the government, only 26% introduced the telework, but after that, it's up to increase to the 67.3%. And maybe it's quite interesting that in June the government relaxed their request to the companies, and to respond to that relaxation, the implementation ratio decreased to 53.1%. So this may show that basically speaking, Japanese companies are not willingly to introduce the work at home situation. I think this is because the quite traditional thought of the companies that they want to watch the employees to work. And I think this is also the the grounds for the labor law in Japan, because the labor standard law of Japan originally coming from the Factory Act means that the law law regulates the workers at the factory. So it's obviously that the employer would watch what employees are doing at their site. So the implementation of the telework or work at home is not welcomed by the companies in Japan. However, because of the COVID-19 situations, as you can see, the situation has been dramatically changed. And but since those changes happened quite in rush and so rapid, many of the Japanese companies are not ready to implement the telework or work at home, and that causes a lot of problem of course after the actual implementation of the work at home. So what would be the challenges of the telework implementation for Japanese companies? And this is based on my experience, consulted by my clients. And many of the companies saying that the communication in the company, of course, reduced. So the answer to this situation might be using the web communication tools such as Zoom or Teams or WebEx. That's the familiar with this functions. It's sometimes challenges especially for the elder persons. That's nowadays, I think from my clients' feedback, they can overcome those situations, I think. And others would be the marketing without face-to-face meeting would feels quite challenging for the companies, especially the person who used to visit their clients' places. And the third point would be quite Japanese, typical and special, because in Japan, most of the important documents are required to be sealed. So if the employees cannot come to the office, that means they cannot put the seal on the documents. So that lead to some discussion among the government. That's the under this situation, assuming that this situation would last, they are going to change the law relating to the seal, so that the company can use the e-seal or other the tools for instead of the put the seal on the actual papers. And management of workers, it causes a lot of problem. Maybe I can point it out in the later slides a little bit more in details. And paperless, the Japanese company tends to love papers, and I think the lawyers loves a lot the papers. That's this has been forced to be changed, and nowadays the many of the company uses this PDF file only. And facilities, of course, the PC networks should be implemented. I think I see a lot of changes in our clients as well. And security, it's all of those the teleworks or work at home requires the security protection as well. So it is also the challenges, I think. And what are the main legal issues for telework? I think most of them are overlapped with the issues in Germany, but some of them are quite Japanese specific, I think. First one is in how to monitor the working hours. So I think in Germany it's not allowed by the law to monitor the individual activities at home. I would like to raise this question later, but in Japan, it is the legal requirement for the companies to record and monitor the working hours. So that is the problem is how to monitor under the work at home situation. That is first things. And also set up a good working environment is quite the problematic for the employers as well as employees. And I have heard a lot of employees complain about the back pain using a poor chair at home. And also the keeping good health, the mentally and the physically it's, or sometimes it's quite, the problems. And, or this is new for us, but I have received some question from the client saying that the one or two, employees of them are asking now to live quite far from their head office, such as the Hokkaido or Okinawa, even though the Tokyo is the headquarters. So, or whether they have to allow that or not. And also the same things is if they allow to live in Hokkaido, whether they can ask the employees to come to Tokyo from time to time, and who would bear that cost. That is the quite new questions, I think. And the right to request work at home. This is also quite new for the Japanese companies, in whether they have to allow the employees to work at home if requested not. And some of the employers still refuse to allow the employees to work at home. Maybe the reason would be varies in several ways, but the main would be those three. First is a lack of facility. They cannot afford the PC for all employees. And the second would be the business, product. They fear about the drop of the business productivity. And the third would be it's it cannot be solved by the nature of the work. If the factories, logistics, they have to come to the place, of course. And the last one is the government support right now that employers can or thinking about. The most the popular support is the maybe third one, small business sustainability grants. This is the money coming from the government. This is a loan, actually speaking, with I think the 0% interest. So many of the small and middle size of employers can thinking about to get this support. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nobuko. Now, Chisako, and we'll move on now to hear about what's happening actually at the companies and what employees are experiencing. And I would like to ask Nobuko now to share with us her insights. Nobuko, please. So your camera is not ideally placed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, we can see you up to your mouth.
I'm sorry.
Further down, further down.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yes. Hello. This is Nobuko Nagase of Ochanomizu University. I'm labor economist, and I would like to show you, how the Japanese economy and workplace changed after this corona pandemic. This is from the government. You can see that that those who are on leave went up quite, jumped up in May, and also overtime work went down in May. But as to the unemployment rate, it hasn't gone up that much. It was 2.5% in March and in 3.1% in October. So, but to look at what happened, okay, I wonder how I can go to the next page. Oops. Okay, we did survey. Ochanomizu University, Department of Human Life and Environmental Science members made a survey about technology, work, and family life, and we conducted in November. This is very fresh data, and we asked both husband and wife whose first child is from age 3 to 15. And we did a website survey of about 4,500 persons. Mothers, about 43% was full-time housewife, and 24% long-term employees, and 33% part-time. So we asked, how did your work style changed after pandemic? And I made the table, the graph, by the first part is wives who are part-time or arubaito or dispatched or a contract, fixed term contract, and then seishain, long-term employees, and then husbands here. And this relates to telework. Now I can work from any place. About 30% of husbands said relatively agree, and 10% said agree. And as you can see, husbands most felt the change, and less so for female seishain, and less so for part-time women too. Work style will be changed even after pandemic settles. Husbands, 40% agree or relatively agreed. Work performance will be given higher value than work attitude. About 40% of husbands agreed. And as Chisako raised the issue of communications, it is now harder to communicate with colleagues. 30% of husbands agreed. It is harder to communicate with boss. About 30% of husbands agreed, and a bit less for female wives seishain, and a bit more less for part-time female wives. So I was interested in this communication issue, but we asked work satisfaction this November, and also we asked work satisfaction pre-pandemic era. So it's retrospective, but we asked for these two periods. And we found that those who said I have now communication issues with boss and communication issues with colleagues, I found that their work satisfaction was low even before pre-pandemic compared with others who did not say so. So it seems that it's not that more that the issue of communication is being made. It's more that when the communication or the work environment was not so good, the pandemic aggravated the issue more because of the teleworking or not being able to go to work. This is the second point. This is the graph I made from about husbands with more work, more hours at home because of the telework or home office, and this purple is those who did not say so. And this is life satisfaction. And we found that the life satisfaction of husbands went up when they had more time at home. The significance for females was very significant. Work satisfaction didn't change between two groups for males, even though it very was significant for females. Child satisfaction also went up, was statistically different between those who said, now after the pandemic, I have more time at home, and those who said there was no change. So we can say that life and child satisfaction increased, especially for fathers in Japan, because fathers in Japan used to stay out of office very often and stay at office for a very long time, have less time at home. So this pandemic seemed to have increased the life satisfaction of fathers who were able to stay home, and also his contact with children too. This is the survey about how the pandemic changed the domestic work. And the left-hand side graph shows that 41% of full-time housewives felt that they had more cooking burden. Also, this sky blue line shows that for males. And males too, by lesser degree, felt the increase in their domestic work. For example, communicating with children increased 18% for males, and cleaning also increased for 18% for males. We also made survey about whether you increase internet shopping or internet food delivery. And we found that full-time working couples in Tokyo area were most keen on the use of device such as internet shopping. This bright purple, red purple, it's for seishain wife, which shows high. Whereas this gray is part-time wife, and this sky blue is for full-time housewife. And this is for husband with non-seishain wife, and this is for husband with seishain wife. So seishain wife have taken most of such devices. This is my last slide. We asked if you feel economic uneasiness after the pandemic. And full-time working husband and you can see that full-time housewife uneasiness is highest. That is at 57%, whereas wife seishain is 45% and wife part-time is 51%. And also we found that the economic uneasiness is felt more among females as compared with males. And full-time working husband and full-time housewife couples has had been a long time typical family that the Japanese government social security system presupposed. But this kind of family is becoming more fragile during this pandemic. Also, you can see that the income distribution is different for those wives who have full-time seishain job. This is a household income level, and those households whose husband only mostly work and wife earns very small or not at all. So I should say that this pandemic have brought first time drastic change of work style of fathers in Japan, even though, it's not the largest percentage, but especially for fathers who worked very long hours who are in Tokyo. It, for the first time, brought a very big change in the work style. And also it increased the role of ICT in the family life, in work life, but also in family life, such as use of internet in shopping, food delivery. We also asked about education too, but in Tokyo area. And I thank you for your kind attention, and thank you for this opportunity of sharing our slides to you. And so
Thank you, Nobuko. Thanks a lot for introducing these very fresh data. And yes, I would like to have the speakers switch on, switch on their cameras, so we see everybody. And we'll have a first round of discussion among ourselves. I also see that there were two questions actually, one from Chisako, who was asking whether an employee in Germany is entitled to request telework, whether employee has the right not to be reached if allowed to work from home. So it's a question of monitoring. So maybe that's a question for you, Michael, and if you like to ask that directly.
Unfortunately, there's no right to request telework, and this has recently confirmed by a labor court decision from my hometown Augsburg. So this is at the moment not the case. There is, of course, an ongoing discussion, and as Andrea kindly mentioned, there's a new law upcoming, and there might be an entitlement of 24 days telework, home office in the future, but we will see whether this will develop in this direction. However, as always, there are some exemptions, for instance, for vulnerable employees, for severely handicapped employees. In those cases, you can consider to be obliged to offer some home office possibilities and options, depending on their sickness, of course. And monitoring and not be contacted. Of course, we have a very strict working time law, and the working time law is mandatory and needs to be respected from the employer's side, and the employer is of course responsible. And in this working time law, we have to grant breaks, and we have to grant some times of not being reached at least 11 hours. Of course, a lot of exemptions are also existing, but this is the general concept. Monitoring is, of course, a challenging issue in this respect, since we have this privacy concept. This is a very interesting field.
Thank you. And then, Michael, you asked whether in Japan now health and safety for remote work, how is this considered? How is this judged? And because I think Japanese homes, we have the impression, especially in the Tokyo area, it's narrower. It's it's not as comfortable maybe like it is in an office. So what about these health and safety issues at home?
Okay, maybe I can answer for that. Currently, we do not have a specific or special act or rules for applying to the work at home employees. However, that has also, of course, been discussed right now to how to keep the healthy, the working environment, even in narrower Japanese resident. So especially for, I just mentioned the chairs and desks is quite, the important for our back healthy, and also the issues of the mental, because, if the employee lives together with the family, that will be fine. However, some of the employees just alone in the room and nobody to speak together. So that causes the bad effects on the employees' mental health. So that also be in the issue right now.
Thank you. And then, Andrea, you asked a question to Nobuko, or maybe also a comment. So you say in Germany, the pandemic would consolidate the traditional role models between men and women in the long run, because women, took over the higher share of childcare during the lockdown. So how about in Japan? Is the burden more on the women, or is it more on the men, or how do they share the burden?
Okay, maybe you know about Japanese family, but the domestic work hour of Japanese wife is so much higher than men, even comparing with OECD countries. It's the men doesn't do, the Japanese women do a lot of domestic work, and the share of Japanese men is very small. But one of the reasons is that Japanese men is away from home for a very long time because of long commuting time, long work hours, overtime work, and they leave their office like at 9 p.m., for example. I'm not joking. I mean, I did a survey before, and there is some peak in about 6 o'clock when they leave the office, but there is also some peak in like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock too. So this pandemic has, for the first time, I think, many Japanese men had much more time at home, especially for those men who works at good company, because those companies has telework and let them stay home. So for the first time, many men were able to see their boys in everyday life, for example, in the daytime. And my study is still in the beginning, but so far I think Japanese full-time wife had to do increased domestic work because she had to cook 3 times a day because children are at home and husband too is at home. So the burden of housewives increased quite much, I think. But for double income couples, more men were able to share the domestic work. But, actually, my students did some qualitative interviews too, and they found that it's not only the hours at home, but also the attitude. It depends. But anyways, our survey shows that more men were doing more communication with their child and doing more cleaning, for example. That there is another survey by the Cabinet Office that shows that when the burden of women decreased, all the burden, all the family, the burden itself increased. But when the share of women kind of decreased, the happiness was higher for those. And if the burden increased, the happiness was lower. But when you look at double income couples, the men had more chance, I think, to do the work. So yes, true, but true that more women, especially the working women too, had to look at child and also do the work. So they were really had a hard time. However, there was benefits too, that for the first time men were staying home like for 1 month or so, looking at have more time to share their look at their children. So I hope I'm answering you well enough.
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting to see this new experience maybe among these couples. Wondering whether this will have a long-term effect after all. But yeah, we had an earlier question. Let's maybe turn to questions from the audience. An earlier question which relates more to real estate and office space. I'm not sure whether we can answer this question from Lennart Görg from Free University of Berlin about co-working space, which has been on the rise. Well, we hear news that now, because of the pandemic, even companies are planning to reduce their office space. There are some very dramatic numbers in the news. So how do you think? I mean, what's going to happen to the office real estate market in Japan? Any ideas, Chisako or Nobuko?
The currently the discussion is quite hot because now we recognize that not all employees should come to the office and we can operate the business. For example, in our office, we now recognize that not all secretaries may not come to the office, and that of course easily to lead the conclusion that whether we have to keep this office or not. And as far as I know, some of the companies already started to introduce the free address system, means that the employee just come to the office and find out that date desk, and or back to and the next day maybe the other person will sit down that desk. So and then the company can reduce the certain numbers of the space of the office, and that affect, of course, the real estate companies' fear, and they they have already had the plans of the new buildings, so that could not be stopped. But I think in the future, for the future plan, the current situation would affect, I think.
Yeah, thank you for this assessment. And we have a question here from Christian Stumpf from BIT, saying, well, in Germany, lots of companies claim that they will keep home office workers even after the pandemic. Is it likely in Japan that companies, I mean, it relates a little bit to this office question, that companies in Japan will keep teleworking at the level? Well, Nobuko, your data, Chisako, your data indicated that after the lockdown, telework went down, but it still stayed at a high level. What is your take on this?
I think, it may relate to the company's policy and the nature of the work. However, the ratio of the introduction and allowing the work at home would not be decreased to the last year's, the level. So maybe it's still keeping the more or less 50%, I think.
I think in Japan, satellite office will increase rather than work at home because of the smaller space at home. And also Japanese workers likes to work together. But I don't think they need, more companies are thinking we don't need the large office in Tokyo, maybe only smaller in Tokyo and some more in area, maybe 1 hour away from Tokyo or 30 minutes away, which makes the renting cost much lower.
Yeah. You mentioned there's some government support, actually, support programs for satellite offices. No? Interesting. So yeah, there's another question from Sinai Harel to all speakers. Do you see a difference both in Germany and Japan between private sector and public sector work, or is the public sector more advanced, or are they backward with regard to telework?
Maybe Germany can start in a certain way. Of course, the private sector has invested a lot of in home office and telework, so we can see that at least the companies are keen to continue home office in a certain way. However, in the public sector, there is still a big discussion. For instance, the school teachers, they don't have laptops. So if we talk about teaching children on a remote basis, this is still not possible. And in particular with all the public related services, like notary services, like going to the administration, you still have to go to them. And even in Germany, for the legal side, we have, for instance, the possibility to have court hearings online, also due to Corona. But to be honest, this is seldomly practiced, since, of course, the digitalization is not so advanced. There are still technical problems, and the judges or the people in the public sector are not familiar with those concepts. I think there's a big difference between public and private sector from my perception.
Andrea, you want to add something?
Yeah, I like to agree, because we have seen before the pandemic that remote work was not possible in many public sectors. And during the pandemic, people who work in the public sector have less opportunities to work from home according to legal perspective, but also because there were the work administrations and work processes could not be transferred for remote work. So I would agree that public sector is far more behind than the private sector.
How about Japan? How about the situation in Japan?
Maybe for the public sector, it is my understanding that they are, quite strictly follow the guidance issued by the government. For example, the court shut down all their, facilities from March to the end of May, and then reopen from June, because that is the announcement by the government. And but on the other hand, the private sectors, it may depend on the size of the companies. I think the bigger companies, such as the very famous trading companies, or the leading the listed companies, tends to follow the announcement by the government. That's for the smaller or middle size of companies. They are not have the room to comply with those, the guidances, and it is my understanding that's the lower ratio to do the work at home, or other types of arrangement, I think.
Nobuko?
How do you think, the Nagase sensei?
Well, at least for education, I did some survey, and the use of Zoom or those kind of technology at primary or middle school had been very low in Japan. They gave homework just to write it up. And that is because the public schools were very much concerned about some family who do not have the computer or iPhone, that they try to make it very equal. And I don't know if that was better or not, but anyways, they did not resort that much to ICT, especially in primary and middle school public schools. Whereas for private schools, they really went forward for this kind of ICT use.
Yeah, that's another question we might maybe discuss at the end, this sort of digital divide, whether COVID is sort of accelerating or making it bigger. But we have some other questions here. Mr. Wunderlich is asking about a new work movement towards more social responsibility and self-organization. Is there a trend towards more self-organizing your work, more independent working styles in Japan?
It's very good question, because in Japan, the workers are the carefully and carefully protected by the law, and it tends to be it is the general understanding that the employee should be like a father or mother to taking care of the workers. So in that sense, and the independency of the workers are not so much proceed. However, because of the situation, I think this trend might be changed, and we can see the many the independent contractor types of workers right now.
Yeah, Nobuko, what is your idea on this?
Sorry, I couldn't catch the question very well.
The question is that this new work, is there a tendency towards more self-organized work, more independent work styles in Japan?
I guess so, but maybe not that. I mean, we have long-term employment practice where students enter good company at 22 and stay there. But there is more students who go to venture firms, and those firms must have a very new way of working. So, but the old firms, I think, still have the old style, I suppose, even though they are trying to refresh it.
I think there's one aspect, maybe I add some dimension to that. There is recently there's talk about side jobs, second job. And I think some companies, about 35% of the companies would be willing to accept, well, it depends, probably not for every employee, but to accept that their employees have some side job or second job, which also indicates a kind of, well, independence, more independence from the company in this respect. And also, I think more than 40% of employees are considering this as an attractive idea, to have a second job. Okay, I wonder whether they have time for that, but let's see. We have another question here. It's a longer one. Let me check whether I can catch the idea. That's about this interesting result, Nobuko, from your survey, that the life satisfaction increased, especially for women. So Eva Habereder would have expected that this goes down, especially with the situation of schools closing and have children at home and all this. So how do you interpret the result that this increased?
No. The increase was for men, not for women.
Okay.
Increase was for men who said my time at home increased after pandemic,
Okay.
either from homework or reduced working time, or reduced commuting time. And it went the life satisfaction as well as children's satisfaction of men went up.
Okay. So for women, you don't see this increase in satisfaction?
I haven't. I think it kind of dropped, especially for housewives who stay at home.
Yeah. The cooking. Yes.
Increased burden of cooking and childcare, and also I cannot remember correctly, but the satisfaction was different between men and women, and I thought this was for full-time working, and I thought this was because women had to look after children very often, whereas many men might have had part-time working wife or full-time housewife, etc.
Thank you. So then Shiho Futagami is asking, what are the major challenges to introduce remote work in Germany? And also a second question, what has happened to the human resource development after the pandemic in Germany, or under the pandemic in Germany? How are companies training their employees under the pandemic? That's a question for Michael and Andrea, or two questions. Yeah.
Very, very good questions. So we have, of course, some legal challenges to implement remote office, but from my perception, the legal framework is not the most challenging aspect. The most challenging aspect maybe is the company culture, whether they allow home office culture or whether they have still a hidden face-to-face culture. And this is something we experienced in several times, that this is very challenging. And then we have, of course, the problems that home office cannot be granted to all kinds of employees. But by production, it's not possible, of course. But also, even in the service sector, some specific groups cannot be granted home office, be it that they have to be in the office for just availability for customers, or be it that they are not in the position to organize them in a certain way, or they don't want to be working completely without contacts of colleagues. So there's no entitlement from the employers to force someone to go to home office, and of course there's no entitlement for employees to work from home. So this is this challenging aspect, the cultural aspect. The legal aspects, of course, data protection, confidentiality, health and safety aspects, they are just add-ons in this respect. Maintenance of IT is also something we have to talk about.
Andrea, you have some information on that?
Yes, so the main aspect, if you are able to work remotely, is the work itself. So we have many aspects of work which is not as good as, or is not where you cannot choose the workplace. And many employers say that infrastructure is not that good. So we have the rural companies, the rural areas where infrastructure is much less digitalized than in the city centers. And Michael already mentioned the cultural aspect. I would add that many employers see this inequality concern. So if they even like to send some of the workers in the home office, there are others who are not able to, and they have to address these inequality concerns. And and there were the question about if we need some more performance orientation or requirements that employees have to take more responsibilities for their work. We see that in Germany as well. So if we work more remotely, we have to change our working style. So working time should not be a performance signal, this is clear, but we have to see or look more at the results of work. And I think that this is a cultural change which will not come next year or in the year after, but this will take time.
But what about the training? Is training put on hold now under the pandemic? Because obviously if people are at home, the training, if training is on site normally, how do you do the training?
Of course, Zoom is frequently used in this respect. So we have done several trainings for companies, for instance, in this respect by Zoom media, even in very sensitive areas like compliance issues, because we cannot go to them and have face-to-face meetings. But we have to fulfill our legal requirements on trainings. So this is a dilemma, of course. It's the same dilemma like remote work. We can see in a certain way there's a gray area, maybe that some aspects of trainings cannot be done. So some qualifications cannot be reached in the next month, but this triggers all of us. So my perception is that Zoom is a certain element in this respect.
Zoom or WebEx, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I might add, we see that only a very small fraction of workers who work a short time use this time for training. So this is not combined, so you are not obliged to use this time for training. And we see that only a small fraction do it right now.
Yeah. Maybe we ask these questions to Japan, because when I talk about home office or remote work and IT infrastructure, my perception is that the Japanese companies are much more used to have good IT equipment than in Germany, but maybe this is this is not correct, Chisako and
the infrastructure in Japan is I suppose better. I mean, when you use mobile phones on the train and I mean listening to the using the mobile network and so on, but I don't know about work.
I think, I think it's of course, depends on the company's size or availability. But for the regular workers, means that seishain in Japanese, the company usually provides the certain, the PC or sometimes the mobile phones, so that they can reach to the office, or they can, react to every, the communication from the clients. That is the purpose to, to bring those, the facilities to the regular employees. That's for the contracted employees or non-regular, so-called non-regular employees, usually those kind of facility would not be provided. So we have some discussion that there should be some unfair between the regular employees and the non-regular employees in that sense as well, and the situation.
Well, I was surprised to hear that. I thought German digital infrastructure might be better because
infrastructure in Germany, including trains and mobile networks, telecommunication networks. I think it's not as, even OECD statistics show it's not as advanced as it is, for example, in Japan or Korea. But in Japan, then the usage is lower. No? So you have the infrastructure, but there are many companies or households who are not able to use it to the full extent. But that's a different question. Now, there is one question related to Japan, which takes up what Andrea mentioned, this tension between those who can do home office and those who can't. And those who can't feel disadvantaged, they feel treated unfairly. And how do you deal? Is this a relevant issue in Japan? How is it dealt with? That's actually an example in the question from Patricia Yarrow about a case from Japan where somebody feels sort of treated unfairly. Managers can go home, but work from home, but he has to come to the office.
I see. From the beginning of the introduction of work at home or stay at home, there is a big difference between the work at home and stay at home, because the stay at home means that no work for them. And under the law of Japan, at least 60% of salary should be paid for in case of the stay at home situation. But still, there is a difference between the 100% salary and 60%. So the government provides the certain fund to, fill up those, differences, and tries to, support the employer who is, willingly to keep their employees, even though there is, no work for them.
Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And many part-time workers work at like retail stores or at restaurants that it is not so much possible to do the remote work.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a white-collar worker and in a good company, the work is more likely that you can do it a large portion of work at home, even though your communication might kind of decline. So according to our own survey, many more part-time workers replied that my work is not good for telework.
Okay, thank you. So maybe a last question, Michael. You have probably the answer for, well, you give the answer for Germany. Are employees entitled to get, I mean, there are additional costs if you work from home. You have, of course, using electricity, maybe telecommunication expenses. You might need some equipment and so on. Is this, or maybe the rent, part of the rent, which is now a workspace? So are there discussions in Japan about how employers should share the costs of home office?
I just, mentioned in my presentation, because the situation suddenly happens, many of the Japanese companies not, they're ready to do such kind of, things. But, according to the guidance issued by the Labor and Health, Labor and Welfare Ministry, it is strongly recommended to consider about paying the necessary costs, such as a telephone or Wi-Fi or other the required equipment for the work at home. But still, it's not the rules or the act in Japan.
Okay. So okay, related to the question before about this unfair treatment. So the case that Patricia is mentioning is that actually both are full-time workers, and both could actually in principle work from home, but the one has to come 50% of the time to the office, and another one can do everything from home. And is there any legal way in Japan to sort of insist of being treated equally if otherwise the situation is the same?
Okay, like in Germany, in Japan, we do not have the regulation or law to treat the employees equally in terms of the work at home versus the work at office. And of course, if there is the some of my clients, of course, asked me whether that treatment would be legally allowed or not. I think legally it is allowed. However, that demotivate the employees who are, unfair, unequally treated. So most of the company tries to do some rotation in that case if they miss the certain office work at office work. And that's the next question is whether the person who has a disability or the disease or the child in care, then that employee could be excluded in that rotation. So many, the discussion happened relating to this, the issues.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so but there might be, if this stays on, there might be the law, even in Japan, the regulations might have to consider equal treatment with regard to home office work, no? I think. So, okay, then, yeah, I think we are almost out of time, but maybe one last question I kept in mind is the digital divide. I mean, we see in many ways that big companies maybe are able to provide the infrastructure. Highly skilled or educated workers might be able to use telework effectively, but then companies in a rural area or less well-trained people might have more difficulties to adjust. And that also, of course, relates to schooling and other things. I mean, the digital transformation, those who are ready and prepared, they will benefit. But those who are not ready and prepared, they are now put at an even greater disadvantage. And how is this? Does this show up in the discussions in Japan and Germany? Is that a policy issue that is being addressed? Maybe Michael, could you maybe give us some idea?
Very briefly, yes. Of course, we see that this is the main challenging aspect of digitalization and the transformation in the small and mid-sized company, as Chisako already mentioned for Japan. This is a big challenge, and even if they want to implement a certain modern IT infrastructure, sometimes they cannot do because the rural area is not so well connected. Still, there's some homework to do, and still this is something we will see that the political discussion, the discussion of the society has to deal with this. But it also showed that we can benefit from a digital transformation, and if we can use this in a certain way, this will help, at least not for everyone, but for some part of people of the society to do their job in a broader way. We will, of course, have the same discussion as Patricia mentioned, where's the equal treatment and how can we ensure that the employees are not demotivated. But this is something maybe the market will regulate by itself. That's my perception.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay. Andrea, you want to add something from the German perspective, this digital divide, inequality?
Yeah, I would say that qualification is the key. So to participate of the digital change and transformation. So we have to focus on how to qualify those who are not able to use the digital measures and to enable them to work in the future. So this is a key element, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How is the discussion in Japan? Is there an awareness of this issue?
Yeah, so that is why the government tries to give the certain fund for the introduction of the IT facilities. So through that way, the tries to minimize these differences between the large company and the mid and small size of.
Nobuko, did you see this in your survey? Did you see this difference?
Well, it's not from my survey, but in my view, this digital transformation, this pandemic will change the way Japanese companies work, especially at large companies. And I think it will be helpful to higher educated women to participate in work just as men when they have children. But it will, because the higher educated can both have full-time work and good pay, whereas the lower educated, maybe they lose job and maybe both cannot work at the same time, that I think the income gap will be increasing, even though it has good impact on female labor, especially for those who are highly educated.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for your presentations, for your answers. Thank you to the audience, a big thank you for your questions and for staying with us. We are a little bit over time. I wish you, if you're in Tokyo, I wish you a good evening. If you are in Germany, I wish you a productive day. And I hope you join us again at our next web forum, which will probably be next year. So all the best wishes for the holiday season too, and see you again in hopefully 2021 with less pandemic and more freedom of movement. Thank you.